καιρό το πράγμα.
Ναι, βέβαια. Γεια σας, τι κάνετε? Can we start? Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute for Democracy. I would like to welcome you in this last Net at Work meeting for the day. So it's the last meeting, so that means that you are the bravest of the attendants here. So we have with us the Deputy Minister of Greece for Welfare and Social Solidarity, Mrs. Domna Michailidou. Unfortunately, MEP Mrs. Vozemberg cannot join us today due to a minor accident, but she's fine. And we have also with us Professor George Prevelakis, permanent representative of Greece to the OECD and member of Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute for Democracy Academic Council, and also Popi Kalaitzi, founding member of the BrainGain initiative. I'm Kakolyris, I'm a journalist, and I'm also a senior fellow at the University of Peloponnese in Greece. So over the next 3 decades, it seems that Europe will face 2 major demographic challenges: the rise of population, a population decline, and rapid population aging. It is projected that the European Union will lose over 30 million people of working age by the year 2050, while the number of people in their 80s and 90s will rise dramatically. Eurostat predicts that we're going to have a negative population change for the period of 2019 to 2080. And the impact of that is rather multidimensional, becoming a shaping factor for the future of Europe, in fact, the welfare of our citizens. So the goal of this panel is to analyze and discuss the social and economic implication and the geopolitical dimension and the challenges connected to immigration. What are the political measures that the European Union has to take in order to cope with this issue? How can we reverse the brain drain problem? So I would like, first of all, to give the floor to our keynote speaker, Mrs. Domna Michailidou. And then we'll have a panel discussion, and at the end we can have a discussion with you for answering your questions. You can also set questions through the Facebook page where we have live streaming. Mrs. Michailidou.
Thank you for this. I'm not sure, do I need to do something with this or I'm fine with this? Okay. Thank you again, and thank you for the invitation and the very good initiative to combine such a panel, because I think at times we're afraid to combine the two, the migration together with the demographic challenges. So we either speak about the one or the other independently, and it's not often that someone thinks that it's a good idea to think that everyone is thinking of them in the same logic. So dear friends, the laughter of children in our parks and schools should not deceive us, as the demographic crisis relating to Europe's aging population is a reality which will become harsher in the coming decades. The impact of these demographic changes on the economy, the structure of our society, and even on the formation of dominant collective perceptions of political and moral issues will be enormous. Dealing with demographic decline through immigration is not, of course, a new historical reality. For centuries, stimulation of population growth through the provision of incentives to productive age groups has been a common practice. In Europe of 2020, demographic decline cannot be attributed to warfare, violent population movements, or epidemics, but to structural changes in the prevalent socioeconomic model, the evolution of medical science, and the changing priorities and consequently choices of young people. Immigration, as a means of demographic increase, has very different characteristics today than it did in the early 19th centuries or after the Second World War. We therefore must not approach the demographic issue solely through numerical projections and actuarial studies. The demographic issue cannot be treated as in the past by only considering its economic aspects, meaning a need for additional labor force to secure the sustainability of our social security systems. It has, in my opinion, become clear that demography is a matter of historical continuity for European nations, and let me adopt some political philosophy terminology, not in the cultural sense of a nation, but in the political sense. The nation, that is, a group of people who live in certain territories, believe that they belong to the same national unity and are possessed by the same national consciousness without necessarily having a common origin, language, or religion. The response to the demographic challenge should accommodate legal migration. This, however, cannot take place on a simplistic and short-sighted basis, and certainly requires taking into account how crucial the successful social integration of migrants is to the hosting communities. Taking solely into consideration typical criteria such as the age, sex, religion, and academic background of our potential newcoming citizens would be naive. Given that the highest inflows of migrants concern nationals from countries with cultural backgrounds considerably different to ours in Europe, a set of standards should be set to ensure a smooth transition to their new homes. The willingness to accept the rules of living in open societies of states governed by the rule of law and the acceptance of their social contracts should be considered an indispensable condition for the functional social integration of incoming migrants. Without these prerequisites, migration may be perceived by the local populations as undermining social cohesion and consequently deemed inappropriate as a response to the demographic decline that we're facing. If the political elites choose to ignore these prerequisites, citizens will question migration as a response to the demographic crisis and, more significantly, will not contribute actively to the implementation of public policies. Our open and complex societies do not lightly accept solutions ex cathedra, and this defines the charming reality of democracy as a way of collective life. Collective emotions are fragile, and they cannot be neglected, especially when we're asked to take political decisions which are de facto related to the questions of collective identity and self-determination. On top of the above, in order to achieve a social consensus on migration as a possible effective means of a demographic boost, I believe that 3 points are of critical importance. First, the systematic and in-depth information of citizens on the challenges related to the demographic decline. Although us Europeans have a general perception of the implications to our daily lives resulting from the aging and shrinking of the population, I think that citizens have not completely realized the intensity and actual dimensions of these implications in the long run. Setting social dilemmas without the provision of symmetric information and hence a sufficient degree of understanding by the public is far from highly recommendable. Second, the persistent fight against illegal migration. It's not surprising that illegal migration has an erosive effect on the awareness of the European societies with respect to the positive impact of legal and planned migration on countries. Additionally, it erodes the capacity of member states to address the refugee crisis in a well-organized manner and in full respect of their obligations under international and European law. In this respect, it is imperative that we elaborate on a new effective legal migration framework on the asylum and migration policy within the European Union, that we guarantee tangible solidarity, not only financial that is, towards the countries of reception, and that we take further action in order to protect the external borders of the EU. Without all these measures, extreme political arrangements will monopolize the public debate on migration and will divert it into a xenophobic rhetoric, misinforming and poisoning the public opinion, eroding any possibility thus to exchange serious arguments on the demographic issue. Third and last point, the pursuit of ways out of the demographic crisis can only be done in tandem with the adoption by the European governments of strong incentives to support family policy and to facilitate the daily life of new parents especially in countries like mine that do not have a comprehensive policy framework in place, at least they did not so far. Designing and implementing a holistic policy on parental support that will include an array of political choices ranging from direct child benefit to eradicate child poverty to funding early childhood education will not only assure economic growth multipliers, but will also make it easier to some extent for citizens to accept that receiving migrants might be a solution to the problem. Dear friends, seeking the right balance between immigration and demographic growth is clearly a very complex issue. Looking for the golden ratio, according to ancient Greeks, or the divine analogy, as Luca Pacioli puts it, is not generally an easy question. As we're humans, not wise, and most likely not divine, forgive any wrong judgment in my claims. The discussion we're having today is crucial. It must take place in fora like this one, but we must extend it to civil society and ensure that the media also engages. Let us all contribute to it with knowledge, sanity, and clear arguments. Thank you.
Well, it is important to hear about European solidarity about the immigration issue, since we are just a few hours before the European Council, and I understand that Greece is going to raise the issue of solidarity in this aspect. But I would like to ask you, I understand that the government is promoting a series of policies, of concrete policies about coping with the demographic issue. And I would like to ask you, what are your concrete policies that you're going to implement regarding this issue?
It's a good question, and actually, it's somehow uncanny that I have two hats in this discussion here. In the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs in Greece, we have both issues. We have the issue of designing effective family policy and tackling the demographic issue, but we also have the issue of unaccompanied child minors, because it does not fall to the competence of the Ministry of Social Protection, as it falls under the umbrella of child protection and social issues. So with regards to the demographic policy, I think it's perhaps the first time that we have a holistic, horizontal, and vertical plan on how to tackle the whole thing. So we go with measures that have a direct fiscal impact, that if you want can be more quantifiable, such as a series of benefits that we're giving to families that want to continue having kids or start having kids, such as an increase in the taxable threshold of income by 1,000 for each kid. So your income which is taxed is increased by 1,000 euros for each, well, your income which is not being taxed is increased by 1,000 euros for each kid that you have. Then we decided to decrease the VAT for products that have to do with toddlers and young kids. We're also introducing, as of January 2020, and this was a big initiative from the Prime Minister and myself personally, a benefit of 2,000 euros for each new birth taking place in Greece. We understand that by itself is not a benefit or an action that can solve the demographic problem, but at the same time, it's crucial for families, given the fact that the initial cost of giving birth, or the first year in a kid's life, is actually at times a prohibitive factor for deciding to have a kid, given the fact that within the first year of his life, and especially in a country like Greece, where unfortunately private births extend to such a high share, it could be prohibitive, the financial cost of raising a kid for the first year. And so we have developed an array of fiscal measures that directly help and, if you want, compensate some financial costs from the side of the young family. And from the other side, we are enhancing, and this is, if you want, the flag of my ministry down in Greece, we're enhancing the early childhood education system. So unfortunately, in Greece, we have the lowest ratio in the entire OECD countries for nursery enrollment from 0 to 2 years old. And this has two negative effects on the entire economy. The one is that it subtracts from the potential human capital value of kids when they grow up, because all surveys demonstrate that the younger the kid socializes, the better his formation is going to be into his entire life. So you are, if you want, subtracting from the value of human capital in your country. And the second is that you compromise female participation into the labor force. When you do not ensure that as a country you provide sufficient finance and sufficient institutions for kids to go to, then they have to stay with the family, most likely, and in Greece predominantly the mothers, that do stay out of the labor force, and this has the result of losing again out of the human capital value for a female, for either not re-entering the labor force or entering it with a de-skilling, if you want, that she was a subject of all the years that she took care of the kid while being out of the labor force. So we are enhancing significantly the program of early childhood education, both financially through more vouchers and extending the pool of beneficiaries that are able to receive the voucher from the government and send their kids into a nursery, but also with regards to financing and ensuring that we get EU funds for these too, new structures, as currently, if we had financing for all kids, we would not have the equivalent number of institutions and nurseries for kids to go to.
And this is very important because it's important not only the state to prove that it really cares about family policy, but actually to take concrete measures and make a difference. But on the other hand, it was interesting for you to hear from you about the gender balance issue. It was a statistic, I think, from Eurostat yesterday or the day before, saying that in Greece we are the least balanced in gender balance. So I think that we have also to take that into serious consideration. But the demographic issue is also it's not only a sociological or economic problem, it's also a geopolitical problem. It has geopolitical factors, and I would like to ask Mr. Prevelakis, what kind of geopolitical implication the demographic issue has? I think that it's one of the issues that we can actually predict, because we can foresee for the next decades what's going to happen.
Should I speak from there?
No, you're fine here.
Maybe I feel better to be standing.
Whatever.
You know, if you have a long academic career, you're used to being standing. Yes, we are moving. In fact, this question of demography and migration is fundamental and has to be addressed on different time scales. Obviously, the first time scale is what the minister has presented, and this is where it is very urgent to adopt the right policy. But at the same time, those issues cannot be tackled on the short term. We have to look ahead, decades ahead. We have to develop a kind of foresight. And this is what my discipline, geopolitics, has been doing. Of course, in the past, it has been doing it in a way that was criticized. Now we are more flexible. Can we predict the future from the geopolitical point of view? We thought we could do it in the past. We are in a period, in an era of such fluidity, of such an uncertainty, that we start to doubt a lot whether we can predict and what we can predict. There is an exception, as it has been said. The exception is demography. Of course, demography in the sense of a closed system. If you take a population in a territory, and if you consider that nobody will get out and nobody will get in, then it is possible to predict the evolution of this population in 10 years, in 20 years, etc. Of course, as long as you don't have political interventions of the kind that China adopted at a certain period with the policy of one child that really changed the rules of the game. But we can predict, and therefore we can predict what will happen in large geographical entities. And it is quite impressive because Europe will decline, and also the population, the European population, will become more and more aged. On the other hand, we will have an explosive growth of the African population. Africa will grow, will become the most dynamic region of the world, and the others will be someplace in between. Now, if you have such imbalances, obviously there are going to be movements. There is going to be migration. And with such imbalances between Europe and Africa on the one hand, and also with the other enormous problem, which is instability in the Middle East, which in my opinion is not a problem that will be solved soon. There are going to be very important pressures, migratory pressures towards Europe. Can we stop that? First, it's very difficult to stop it. Although there is the fight against illegal migration and all the means, etc., there are limits to that. You cannot build a wall around Europe to protect it from the rest of the world. And it would be extremely, I would say, reactionary in the old sense of the word if we wanted to do it. And I think it would lead, if it could be done, it would lead to a very deep decline of Europe. Not only from the material point of view, but also from the cultural, the spiritual point of view. But it's not only pressure. It's not only pressure. It's also that this kind of evolution of the population creates a pull factor. Obviously, from the economic point of view, it's a question of the labor market. But it's not only that. And we have the experience in our countries. We have the experience in Greece and in other countries that were less organized in controlling legal or illicit migration. It is our experience of our societies when our parents started aging and when it was necessary to find people to help them in a country where the social security system is not sufficient. And what happened? There was this offer of people coming from Albania, from the communist bloc. And those people were trying to get in, often illegally. Well, it's not a secret that our families were trying to help them. We're trying to pull them. So on the one hand, they are pressing, and on the other hand, because there is a need in the society, they are helped even if the official state does not encourage it. The society is pulling. So this is a certain trend that there are going to be important migratory movements. And therefore, we have to think very seriously how we can cope with that. Because according to the policies we will develop, and also according to the kind of ideas that the public opinion will adopt about those issues, we could obtain a relatively positive result or a disastrous result. Because what happens if you have important immigration is that the understanding of identity of a people is challenged. Therefore, you have to cope with this problem, and you can cope in two ways. One way is to evolve your own identity. You see, identity is a very tricky concept because apparently identity does not change, and we are convinced that we are like our fathers, like our forefathers, etc. And this is very important because if you want to believe in your identity, you have to maintain this illusion. In fact, identity is changing all the time. We are not the same as we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago in every country. So it's a very dynamic concept, in fact. And the way that this that this evolution of identity takes place, the role of the intellectuals is very important in order to evolve towards an open identity that at the same time maintains its role in the cohesion of the society. This is the one thing. The other thing is how you include those people that are coming in. And there are limits. Very well-known anthropologist, Harvard anthropologist who has worked a lot on Greece, Michael Hertzfeld, has developed the term of cultural intimacy. We are more close with certain people than with others. And this, you must not confuse it with the idea, with Huntington's idea about religions. Because you can be close with somebody with another religion, geography plays a very important role. We can be very close as with a background of Orthodox Christian. Sometimes we are much closer with Muslim Turks because we live together and we have similar experience than with Christians coming from other countries. But cultural intimacy is very important. And therefore, the societies that try to organize this will search to select somehow the immigrants on the criterion of cultural intimacy. It's also a very tricky question that can lead in a kind of selection that can be very reactionary. But you know, the solution is not to say we don't touch the difficult problems because they are difficult. We have to tackle them, otherwise they take the revenge in a much more aggressive form. I would like to make one last remark. Obviously, those are issues that need a lot of discussion. We have to see what this kind of selection process means in the context of Europe. Because we are already in a kind of an internal competition in Europe in order to attract those people from inside Europe that are more compatible with our societies. And in that case, it's obvious that the countries that have a weak economy will lose population, who will be attracted by European countries with a stronger economy, who, of course, will prefer to receive immigrants from inside Europe than from outside Europe. And this is in contradiction with one of the major, if not the major objective of the European construction, which is the principle of convergence. We used to think about it in economic terms, and we used to think that somehow capital transfers must be made so that the weaker economies can come closer to the stronger economies. Now, this is going to produce the opposite effect, because the economic differences will create flows of population that will weaken even more the weak economies from the demographic point of view, and therefore also from the economic point of view. And therefore, there we have a major threat for the cohesion of Europe because of this migratory and demographic competition. Thank you very much.
Well, it's difficult to take the academic out of academics. But indeed, the issue of identity, I think that made the immigration crisis far more difficult to cope than the economic crisis we had before. And we can see that the political impact, it's far more impressive and far more dangerous, I could say. But it seems that our societies are not ready to discuss about it, isn't it?
Well, obviously, I think we have... The world is changing very rapidly. This is not only in respect to the to migration, it's in respect to everything. We are in a world which is changing very rapidly, and our societies cannot adapt because we have inherited certain visions of the world. We still have a vision of the world that has its roots in the Cold War. And we are extremely far from that world of the Cold War. So it's not surprising that we have such a delay. And I think that a major thing is that we are not very able to manage this question of identity, which is crucial. And we see the results because it is taken over by all kinds of populist ideologists, and it can lead to extremely negative effects. We have those two poles. On the one hand, I would say we have reactionary people that take this idea of identity. They see it in an essentialized way, like as if it was an object, and therefore they use identity in order to divide the people. And then we have a kind of progressive tendency that says, this is not an issue, let's not discuss about it, etc. And those two are, in a certain way, working together, because this exclusion of the question of identity from our field of discussion leaves the field open to those that will treat it in a negative political way. We have to address this question. We have also the additional difficulty that we have inherited the legacy of two ideologies that were ignoring this question. Marxism, for Marxism, what is important is the material world, it is the economy, but also the liberal approach is very much oriented towards the material world. Therefore, whatever has to do with the cultural background of politics has been left outside. And this is a field that we need to reconquer because its results on politics are extremely deep and are coming in an extremely rapid way.
Another factor which is connected to the demographic decline is a brain drain issue. I mean, Greece is very familiar with that. We had that in the beginning of the previous century, where people used to go to the United States. Then we had that after the war, where people used to come to Central Europe, either Belgium or Germany. And we also have that now as an outcome of the economic crisis, but not only that. And I can see some people of the brain drain here, some Greeks, who left their country trying to find a better life in Belgium. So I would like to ask Popi Kalaitzi from the BrainGain initiative, how big is the problem of brain drain in Greece, and how exactly are you approaching this? Which are your priorities?
So I see here not only brain drainers, but I see some active members of the BrainGain family, and I'm very pleased. So when we refer to brain drain, we refer to something negative. And we decided, the people that forced to leave the country after the crisis, after 2010, because this, it's this kind of people that lived after 2010 that we refer as brain drain. It's not the same like the people that left in the 60s, my grandfather, for example, because they were not the most talented like now. The problem with brain drain, and that's why we refer to it as this is something negative, is that the youngest and more talented people leave the country. And they are the more skilled people that they could contribute to the development of the country. And that's why this is the problem. So when we asked our members, because the BrainGain initiative is an initiative that started in 2015, I will tell you some things later, we made some surveys to our members. And we asked them, why you leave your country? Of course, 60% they answered because for my career. there is also 46% that they said that we live in order for education, but they stayed because earlier it was very often that young Greeks could go to universities in the United States or in Europe, but they would return to their country. After 2010, they stayed abroad. So, but what also surprised us is that when we asked them what was the main obstacle when you leave, okay, 65% they said that there was a limit for my career. It was not only the unemployment, it was the fourth reason. But it was also that the jobs are not well paid in Greece. And also, another problem in Greece, let's be honest, is that if you don't know somebody, you don't have the same chances. And this is not only in the public sector, but this happens also in the private sector. So, how many is that brain drain problem for Greece? I could talk to Greece for Greece, although the same problem it was a problem for Italy or for Spain, or even Bulgaria, or even for Ireland. But they did a very good job, Ireland. So it is estimated that 500,000 people left Greece after 2010. And how much did it cost to the Greek economy? 15 million. Because all of these people... billion, sorry. And this is because they were well-educated people that the Greek government, the Greek universities paid for their education, and then they left, ready. But the problem also with that generation is that they were forced to leave their countries because there is a ceiling for their dreams. It's not the money, it's the dreams, because when you are young and you have talents and you have a very good education, you want the best for your life. And the young people in Greece, sometimes, most of the times, they feel that there is a ceiling. So, in order to make their dreams come true, they should leave their country. But this generation is not the same as the previous generations that you said in the 60s, because our generation is well connected to Greece. In real time, we know what happens. We can drink coffee with our friends via Skype, for example. We travel a lot. I know a lot of people that go every week back because their family lives in Greece. I did the same when I was in Berlin. Almost every weekend, I would fly back to Thessaloniki or Athens. So this is not what we have in our minds about diaspora. This is a new era diaspora, which has a very good potential. And that's why we decided to make this initiative BrainGain, because we felt that we have knowledge and the will to help our country, but nobody would like to hear us. That's why we thought that it was better to organize ourselves. So it started in 2015. Some people that were living all over the world. We created a small group of 8 people, and then we became some thousands. Today we have around 4,000 people in our initiative. And what we felt is that there is a lack of data about this new diaspora.
So you have run some researches about it, and I wonder which are the results that you have, and what kind of policies do you think that are appropriate in order to cope with this issue?
Okay, so the result is, and this is a surprise, that 50% would return if some small things change in a year. So they have one foot in Europe or in the States and the other in Greece. And this is impressive. So we just need some small changes. But also, what is very special about this generation is that they want and could help their country, even from where they work. And this happened, for example, in China or in India. The brain drainers, with their connections, contributed to the development of their countries. For example, with some helping the research. We have also some paradigms in Greece. There is a very good researcher, Konstantinos Kalakis, that want to establish a center for research. He's a university teacher in the MIT, I think, but he wants to establish a center for research in Greece and help young researchers stay in Greece and work there. So the people, the brain drain could be brain gain, could be also brain circulation, because also the people that live abroad, hello Stelios, could also bring their money back. We could have collaboration, something that is not very easy for Greeks, but maybe with the other mentality that have the people that work abroad, we could also help in order to change the mentality in the Greek society. And this also could be a gain. Of course, our main goal is to return. And we should really talk about the relocation packages or the relocation policies that could bring the people back. What was also another impressive fact in one of our surveys was that people would return for less money than they take where they are, because they have the bond with their family, because they...
it's more than money.
It's emotional.
Yeah.
It's more than money, and the people that left didn't left because of the money only.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick question. Do you think that the voting right for people abroad will be an important factor for these people to keep? Just a quick answer, because I will ask the minister about that after. But I want the feeling you have.
So it's not a right. We have the right, because
Yeah,
we
of course.
left after 500,000 left after 2010. But because of technical reasons, maybe, and because of economical reasons, we cannot vote in Greece. So we ask for what happens in most of the countries of the world, to vote from, because we have that right, from where we are. And also we have, in Avaz, we collected 100,000 signatures, the BrainGain initiative about this. So it's not logic not to vote from where we live.
The previous government was not very positive in that, although you have managed
It's totally negative.
Yes. Let's say about this government. You are promoting this, a new system, isn't it?
Well, it's exactly what you said and what Ms. Kalaitzi said before. It's promoting a new system and a new method, because the right is already there. You know that currently, and not just currently, it's been more than 3 decades, that American astronauts can vote. You can vote for the US elections from the moon, but you cannot vote for the Greek ones from Brussels. So the way that the system currently stands is that you can vote, but you can only vote if you have the financial means of doing so. So the previous government was supporting basically the option only for the better off. Mm-hmm. And what we want to do and what we want to change is establish a system and the technicalities that support this system, which will enable people that do not currently have the means to go back, or the time, if not the means, but most substantially the means to go back to our country and vote there. I've been someone living outside my country for 11 years. I'm not sure if I'm part of the BrainGain. I'm not sure whether the brain part works there, but I'm part of the returnees. And it was a big hassle and a big financial hassle when I was a student. For the prolonged period I was a student, being the fact that doing a PhD, you get the student status forever. Every time it was a financial hardship for me, thinking that I have the option of either going back to my country and voting or spending the same amount of money for something else. So what the government is doing is enabling the ones with neither the financial means or the time to do what they can do now, but without all the hassle and the admin burden.
I would like to encourage you also from those who are watching us from live streaming to send us a question. I have two questions. The one is the demographic decline is a major problem for rural areas, which are actually deserted in a way. And this has political implications, for example, the yellow jackets. And what kind of policies do we need in order to cope with that? And I don't know if Mr. Prevelakis would like to...
Well, I'm not sure if it is limited to rural areas. Obviously, there are rural areas that have been abandoned, but this has been the result of migration towards urban areas, what we call urbanization. Now, there are, of course, policies that can retard demographic decline, but we have to understand that there is a process that we call demographic transition, and you cannot stop it. What happens when a society, a pre-modern society, is modernized? It is under the influence of two factors that are decoupled in time. The first is that medical services become much better, which means that people do not die as they did in the past, and especially important it is that you have infant mortality that goes down, which means that you have a very rapid growth of the population, and you have a very rapid growth of the younger population. So the total quantity is bigger, and from the point of view of quality, also you have a younger population. Of course, the first stage means that you have children, which creates economic problems, but then you get into a wonderful period. It was the period of Greece in the 50s, when you have large numbers in the working force and limited number of the categories that depend on them. And then the second wave is cultural change, because you have better education systems, because the relationship between the sexes is changing, because you have contraception, you have all those things that lead to a limited rate of fertility, a limited rate of births. And of course, the health services continue to get better, which means that the old people live more. And this, of course, will lead little by little to a change, which means, on the one hand, that your population will start shrinking, and it's going to become older and older. Now, these things, you can retard them with the right policies, but you cannot stop it. You cannot stop it. And we see that little by little in Europe, the countries that seem to have a strong demography, like Greece 20 years ago, still it was relatively well. Little by little, the one country after the other is falling. One of the last was France. France had a strong demography because the state was very active in promoting families, also because they have had immigration. And now even France's population is shrinking. So this is something you cannot stop. And the only way to balance it is through migration, by bringing in population that will add to your population, and also by bringing in population which has still maintained, which comes from the first stage of the demographic transition, which means that they have still high fertility rates. And you see that societies that have managed somehow to cope with this, like the United States, it is a country that is relying a lot on immigration. So you cannot avoid that. What you have to do, you cannot close the doors. What you have to do is politics and culture, is how to create, to organize the evolution of your society so that it maintains its character, it doesn't betray its tradition, but at the same time, it opens arms up to other people. And this you can do, on the one hand, by respecting cultural distance. If you bring people completely different, it becomes more difficult. And also, it's a question of time scale. You cannot do that in 1 year. You have to do it gradually, which means that the longer we put in order to get this process going, the worse it becomes, because sooner or later you have to accept it, and then you have a limited time in order to adapt.
And
Let me
yeah, of
make
course.
an intervention here. Because what I would like to do is point towards an existing paradox and the responsibility that us policymakers have related to your question. So the existing paradox is the following, that from the one side, you have desertification, if you want, of rural areas, as you mentioned, in Greece, for example. But from the other, you have the same people leaving the rural areas of Greece to go to rural areas abroad. So it's not necessarily that they dislike the rural part, but there's something else there. And I mean, I'll give you the personal example. I was living in Cambridge, UK, which is a village outside London. And what I found out to my great surprise was that Greeks had moved to villages outside Cambridge, the village outside London. So you were wondering what these Greeks were doing there in a place that had not really any job opportunities. The medical and welfare provisions were all right, nothing phenomenal about them. And this is where I think the state has failed us back in Greece, because suddenly we all became helpless vis-a-vis the grand monster of brain drain. So there was this social construct, if you want, that we are helpless and people need to leave because we have very high unemployment rates. We do have the crisis here, but they did not necessarily go out, all of them, searching for their better dream. They left the country because the dream was left completely abandoned. So what we need to do is establish an ideology and eradicate the cleavage between the bad home country and the full of hope abroad. What we need to do is demonstrate that there is job creation here. There are other means of, and to demonstrate this, we need to do it first. I think we are in a good path about it. But demonstrate that that the exit from the country is not an automatic mechanism. That actually many people have left the country without practicing better employment opportunities than they would have had back home. So, for example, in these people that I have in mind, these Greeks that were living in the village, outside the city, these Greeks were living 4 or 5 of them together with other people from other nationalities that they had no idea how they were, who they were before, living in small houses in these villages without great employment opportunities, but just part of their choice was accepting the premise of we need to be part of the brain drain because there's nothing back home. So effectively, the conditions under which they were or still are living are not significantly better than being back in a village, outside a city in Greece, where they would be collecting peaches, for example, because their living standards would have been similar, if not better, back home. So we have a responsibility there, showing that in the relative scale of things can be better, and at least will be better.
And I think there's a psychology factor here.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's a political responsibility to demonstrate this and show, rather than the relative, the absolute side of things.
I have one more question online, but there's a question here from the lady. Wait for the microphone. And another for the gentleman.
Thank you very much. I'm Natasha Arvaniti. I'm the Economic Policy Advisor to the President of the European Committee of the Regions. As you might know, last week there was our European Week of Regions and Cities, and I moderated a very interesting workshop brain gain in rural and sparsely populated areas. So it is good that if you would like to visit our website, you will see how especially Sweden managed to gain and keep their youth in the rural areas, and we talk about sparsely populated areas up in the Lapland. Of course, you understand I'm a brain trainer, that's for sure, and I'm not sure that I'm convinced that I would come back to Greece pretty soon. But I have two questions. We talk about migrations and their benefits, but we do not distinguish between legal migration and illegal migration. So the problem, if there is any, lies with illegal migration. And Professor, I'm not sure I agree with you. I beg to differ a lot. You say that identity is a tricky concept. Sorry, it's not. Everybody knows who they are.
But
Black
I
or
would
white
appreciate
or
have a
whatever.
question with a question
The question
mark at the
is,
end.
no, I need their position on this stuff. So illegal migration, do we want it? And what time and how long does it get to adopt and be inclusive in our societies? Because this is the issue.
Thank you. Mr. Prevelakis? Yes.
Well, I cannot agree with you that identity is a simple notion. Maybe in my work I'm explaining that the term identity is not well adapted, and I'm using another term, but I don't want to get into theoretical discussion. But the identity is the most critical issue in politics, because this determines, of course, we talk about a collective identity. You say, we know, okay, individual identity, but I'm speaking about the collective identity. Collective identity creates the cohesion of a group, and therefore it is based on that, its capacity to become a subject of politics and of international politics. But at the same time, identity defines the relationship of this group with the outside world. If you say our identity is based on Orthodox Christianity, you open up to Russia. If you say that our identity is essentially European and Western, you open up to the West. When Karamanlis says we belong to the West, this is an element of identity that creates geopolitical consequences. As the geopolitical environment is changing all the time, every country has to readapt its opening or closing to elements of the geopolitical environment. Therefore, it is all the time changing its identity. All the time, identity is changing through processes that are very complicated. They have to do the role of the intellectuals, etc. So this is identity is the focus of both internal and international politics. And for me, it is a major concept for political science and for international relations. Now, the other question you said was, sorry, excuse me, there was another question. Okay. Well, from the, if you like, from the legal point of view, of course, those distinctions are clear and they have consequences, etc. From an academic point of view, from a geographical point of view, it is blurring. It's not very clear. And, well, you know, as Greeks, we have the experience. We have been illegal immigrants as well. And therefore, it's much more complicated. It has to do with the dynamics of demographic change, of closing and opening of the world. It is an adventure. It is the adventure of Ulysses. It is the adventure of the film America, America. As Greeks, we cannot be so severe about those movements. But we have the right to disagree.
Let's hope that we will find Ithaca at the end. So the gentleman over there, and then Mr. Kitsos, the MP. MEP.
Thank you, Gergely Varga from Budapest, from the Institute of Foreign Affairs and Trade. If we look around Europe today, one of the most characteristic family policies is adopted probably by the Hungarian government with generous tax breaks, with daycare building programs, with generous loans for building homes for families, etc. Of course, as we all know, there are some other policy areas where there are source of tensions from policies adopted by the Hungarian government. But just looking at the family policy and the strategy of the Hungarian government in terms of how to strengthen families and support families, do you see these policies as a good template for other European countries in how to encourage families to have more children? Thank you.
I think perhaps Minister would like to answer this question.
I mean, I would love to if I had some kind of empirical evidence on it. I must plead guilty and say that I'm not incredibly well aware of the Hungarian model. The models we've been studying so far have mostly to do with the Scandinavian countries plus Germany that managed within a short time frame to reverse the demographic trap that it was experiencing post the unification of the two countries. So, point noted, and I hope that next time I will be able to answer your question on the legitimacy of the Hungarian model and how well it's going to be assimilated.
So I will have to give the floor to the question for Mr. Kirchhoff and then to the gentleman over there. Mr. Kirchhoff here.
Thank you very much. I think I'm rather optimistic because I think that all the extrapolations that we make are basically wrong. And I can give you an example. For instance, the IMF thinks that Greece will remain bankrupt until the year 2060 because they calculate the servicing of our debt with an interest rate of 4.5 to 5%. Who could have guessed that Greece can borrow short-term right now with zero cost? And one of the reasons that the IMF thinks that we'll remain bankrupt forever is demography, because they think that since we have a big demographic problem, we won't be able to manage in an effective way our economy. We won't be able to develop, so the rate of development will be lower than the interest rate, so we'll be eternally bankrupt. So all this model, which is the IMF developed and everybody agreed that it is valid, does not hold. I believe the same will happen with demographics in Greece, and I have certain examples. A lot of young people start coming home. For instance, my son, who is very successful, the city of London, now he's in his 30s, he's about to have a family with a very nice Greek girl who also works in London. But the notion of being alone and raising a family in London terrorizes both of them, because in Greece they think that their grandmother or myself, the grandfather,
they're very optimistic.
Yes, in Greece we still have the so-called extended family in a better, let's say, not as we used to have it, but compared to more advanced societies, we still have it. So I can see that things, the world is shrinking, Europe is shrinking. They keep going back and forth. Even those that are in Berlin or in London are in a way to promote the development of the Greek economy through 100 ways. Maybe they take managerial decisions. Maybe they can offer us more tourists of the kind that can spend a lot of money if they keep returning home. And finally, I'll tell you another example with Poland. Poland thinks that the government is very conservative. They prevailed in the recent elections, 44%, and they think that they have a closed society. Since I'm a member of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee, and I keep going back and forth, I visit Ireland. I found there 400,000 Poles. I went to the United Kingdom. It's the largest minority, ethnic minority. But the funny thing is, in Poland, last year, 1.2 million Ukrainians had to go to Poland and work there and fill the gap that was created. So we have all these movements. And of course, the Polish government insists that they are not going to accept any migrants or whatever, and the whole system is based on migration. So I think that our society is more complicated than we think. So all these models trying to extrapolate the present into the future, I think that they're bound to fail.
Okay. Professor and Ms. Kalaitzi, I don't know if you have a comment. Yes.
Well, yes, no, obviously I agree with you. I mean, I'm very skeptical with those extrapolations, and in fact, the behaviors are very complicated, and all this idea that the brain drain is that as if we lived in the 19th century, people go to the United States and disappear. It doesn't work like that. Being outside sometimes is more helpful for the country. We lived in a connected world. Depends on the kind of education, and I think that in fact the solution is to develop all those networks, and also, I mean, we can take the example of Greece with the Albanian immigration. 1 million people came. And they are Greeks now. They are better than Greeks because they have been more hardworking, and they have created, they got in Greece working under and very often exploited by Greek businessmen. And now they are the businessmen, and they are employing Greeks. So in fact, it is a very complex system. And we have to take into consideration, but this has to do with identity as well. It has to do with how a society, I think that the success of the Greek society, we have gone through 10 years of crisis, of course, we have lost a lot, but the success of the Greek society is that it has a flexible identity. In spite of the way that we present ourselves, it has a flexible identity because we have elements from the identities of all the people that are around us. And therefore, we have the capacity to integrate. And we see that people from I would say from the region, from the Eastern Mediterranean, from the Balkans, when they come to Greece, they love Greece. They want to be in Greece. Turks, now that Turkey has so many difficulties, creates so many difficulties for people, for Turks that feel oppressed, etc., many Turks come to Greece. Why do they come to Greece and not elsewhere? Because of cultural intimacy, because they feel very close. So we have all those elements are very important to see whether a policy, a population policy, which combines demographics and migration, whether a population policy is successful or not.
Mrs. Kalaitzi?
I would agree, because I returned home in order to make my family. But the problem is with the people that make families where they work. And your son found a Greek girl, but what happens with the people that make a family with other people? So
we Hellenize them.
Yeah. And
it's very simple.
Most of the times they want to return back, the husbands and the. But because you gave me some food for thought, and I would like just to make a remark, and not as a brain drainer or brain gainer, about the demographic decline. There is also a problem for our societies in Europe or in the States. The problem is that the people becoming older and older with no good health. We don't have a lot of young people that pay their taxes, and people over 60s with a lot of comorbidities. This is a great financial issue for our systems, our healthcare systems. What happens with that dimension? Because if no young people work in order to pay the taxes, who will pay for 40 years for people that are not do not age well. So we should give some more attention to the aspect of healthy aging. And I think this is, and prevention, of course, this is the primary prevention and the secondary prevention. When we have something, a disability or an illness, how we can prevent the problems that bring that illness or disability.
So a lot of tasks for the new government. The gentleman over there.
Stasinopoulos, formerly with the European Commission. I want to apologize because I missed the presentation of Deputy Minister because of traffic. And my questions relate with the intention of the Greek government, what kind of approach is considering. I spent 9 years in Canada with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And overall, Canada has a very interesting immigration policy. And if I recall well, they had almost two phases. First, the decision to admit. For that, they try to draw stakeholders as broad as possible, even from the private sector, employers, tourist people. And then they reserve the function of supervision and screening to the government. So I'm wondering whether the Greek government, among the many probably alternatives, is willing or is considering that.
Let me ask before you give the microphone back. When you're suggesting stakeholders on the same table, what stakeholders on which issue are you referring to?
Even a part of the immigrants as well, but mainly from the private sector, let's say employers, tourist people, overall, in order to bring the background on the needs for kind of immigrants. And then leave only for the government to do the supervision, screening on the basis of security or health.
Sure. So, I mean, I can talk to you about the competence that comes under my Ministry of Labour with regards to what we're planning to do for unaccompanied children and how we integrate them and the strategies we have on this issue. You were not here before, I guess, but unaccompanied children are under the competence of the Ministry of Labour because it falls under the umbrella of child protection. So currently in Greece, we have almost 5,000 unaccompanied children, 4,800. And unfortunately, since this July, the inflows of unaccompanied children is increasing geometrically. So even within September, we had 500 more arrivals. And generally, the equilibrium of people, of kids now in Greece that come unaccompanied is twice as much as they were last year in October. So we need, why am I saying this? Because we need to understand that, sure, we are trying to do our best in order to first reunify them with their families in Central Europe when they have a relative, but also lobby and advocate as much as we can so that other countries can take and host some of those kids. Because we need to ensure that there is a proportionate distribution of these kids. But then we also need to realize and understand that part of these kids is also going to stay at home. And we need, as policymakers, to ensure that, one, we provide and cater for these kids under the umbrella of child protection so that they can have what a kid needs. And you know, even the EU now is going on with this idea of child guarantee, following the youth guarantee that it was giving before. And then also ensure from the one side their protection, but from the other side ensure that they are included and encompassed within the Greek society in the best possible way in order to exclude any kind of side effects that they might have. Let me give you two statistics. 93% of these kids are over 14 years old, and 94% of them are boys. So we have to deal with teenage boys, right? Why is it teenage boys? Because it's only teenagers or kids over the age of 14 that can manage to travel by themselves, right? And they're boys because, unfortunately, if they were girls, they would have most likely fallen victims of some kind of trafficking. So we have to deal with teenage boys. I'm saying this because the resulting need to incorporate them as best as we can in the society is even higher. Because teenagers are teenagers no matter if they're from Afghanistan, from Greece, or from the US. They are kids that the blood is boiling, and they're not 2 or 3 year olds. So we need, and what are we doing there? Yes, we do put all stakeholders on the table. We're not just in very close collaboration with the Ministry of Social Protection, but also, I mean, domestically what we do, with the Ministry of Interior Affairs and all the municipalities that host in hostels kids like that. We are in very close collaboration with all the European and international bodies such as UNHCR, UNICEF, the International Organization for Migration, but also international NGOs that are competent on the issue. And then, of course, we are talking to the kids themselves or their families that the families that they have or part of them has reunified with in Central Europe. So we do try to put all stakeholders there and understand that to include them or assimilate them, if you want, in the best way we can. A key issue is the one of the language, and is where our state, if it has not failed, it has not done exceptionally before. So you have these kids that come at this age, they're not really, really young to learn the language immediately, and currently, in a legislative manner, they have the same rights with a Greek kid to go to school, but this is not sufficient. They do go to what we call, most of them go to what we call intercultural schools, or school, because there are not many of them. And the introduction classes that they're there suffer from a lot of problems. Whether these are time lags, that the classes start in January or February for this year to introduce them to the actual classes, whether it has to do with translators who are not there at school, especially in the rates that we would like them to be, whether it has to do with their transportation to these schools. So a big program that we're running now in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, of course, is what we do with language courses being delivered to these kids. So yes, we are putting all stakeholders on the table. We are treating the matter seriously, and we are treating the matter seriously because we understand that most of these kids are going to, if not most, then half at least, are going to stay in Greece. And in order to provide the best for them, but also minimize the risk of a bad integration strategy, we need to do now whatever it takes. Thank you.
I don't know if there is a quick round of questions. Just quick, please, because we're running out of time, as Panos indicated.
Thank you. Demosthenes Mamonas from the Council of the EU. I would like to hear your views, the panel's views, about the impact of the demographic decline on the Greek pension system. And I'm asking because you know well that we have a pay-as-you-go system, so you need basically 4 people working to pay the pension for one retiree, whereas now actually we're at a ratio of 1.2 to 1 or something like this. So even in the best case scenario that we would be able to integrate all the migrants in the Greek system and taking into account also the brain drain, I think we're talking about a mission impossible. Thank you.
I think it's Mrs. Michailidou will have
Oh dear,
the difficult task.
I was so happy that this question did not come up. I thought that we would just close more neutrally, if not
But
optimistically.
you have to be quick because we don't have a time. So
You are right. The replacement ratio is dreadful, to be honest. 1.2 to 1 is a very dire replacement ratio. I would have loved to be as optimistic as the MEP, Mr. Kirkos here, but unfortunately I cannot. The problem is what Ms. Kalaitzi mentioned before has to do with the distribution of the ones that have, not just with the numbers, but also with the distribution. So of the ones that have stayed behind and the ones that have left. So the ones that have stayed behind are the receivers, and the ones that have left are the ones that were the suppliers. and the suppliers that have encompassed all the levels of educational investment on them. You know, all the doctors leaving, the state has invested, Mrs. Kalaitzi would know more, but I think 80,000 euros on the formal education of each doctor in Greece. So you have the... I thought that was the figure, but maybe more. So you have the direct cost of this going elsewhere. You have the indirect cost of this person not contributing to the Greek welfare system with regards to his services, but also not contributing to the Greek pension system with regards to his contributions. So this is further compounded by the fact that we have a grave situation to deal with undeclared and even more underdeclared labor. So the pool of beneficiaries seems to be increasing. Medical developments are contributing positively towards the direction of the pool of beneficiaries increasing, and the pool of suppliers to these funds has hitherto been decreasing, and decreasing by the ones that could contribute the most in this pool. So I cannot be optimistic, and this is the direct economic reason why the demographic issue has such a growth posing, if you want, dimensions.
So if I could have a conclusion out of this discussion, is that there is not a panacea in the demographic decline. There are many policies that have to be implemented. And the feeling I have is that we are not ready to cope the challenges of demographic decline. But I do hope that this discussion give you interesting food for thought in this issue. So I would like to thank our panelists for joining us today. I would like to thank you for being here. And I would like to thank, on behalf of the Konstantinos Karamanlis Institute for Democracy, our partners, the Wilfred Martin Center, and our colleagues, Panos and Margarita, who worked very hard to have this conference here today. Thank you very much.